they're being decided by an independent agency through printing money. There is no established rationale in economics that I'm aware of that justifies an independent agency of government to do this. All of the research, I'm sure I don't know it all, but all the research I know about is voluminous on the rationales for central bank independence. They're about inflation control. They're not about investing in certain sectors in the economy. Unwinding these programs is difficult. The Fed has this huge balance sheet. If it sells them right away, it's obviously going to be disruptive. But if they don't sell them, there's a lot of inflationary pressures, which is really the last point. All that money out there, size of the Fed's balance sheet, and other central banks who have engaged in this, is effective inflation, especially with increases in public debt. So that's kind of the legacy problem of this. And so for all these reasons, and I'll try to wrap up now, all these reasons, it seems to me it's important to exit from this as fast as possible. This is a strategy I designed to exit, so it's a way in which the Fed would reduce its balance sheet by a certain amount, $100 billion, whenever it starts to raise interest rates. So when it raises interest rates by 25 basis points, it would reduce its reserves by $100 billion by selling mortgage-backed securities. So it's kind of a strategy that I think would work. One of the advantages of this strategy and where the $100 billion comes from, you can get from looking at how the Fed first entered this. And so this is, I think, a useful slide. Combines two things. One is the increase in reserves, so that's the increase in the monetary base, and the federal funds rate, the overnight interest rate. And you can see that back in the panic is where they started to raise the reserve balances. The interest rate was 2%. And that's actually an important issue itself, because frequently people say the reason to have to do this expansion was the interest rate was at 0. Well, the interest rate was not at 0 when it started. The interest rate was at 2%. And of course, it was driven to 0 by this expansion of money. Very, very close pattern. So we're now, this is back still in the panic. The 0 interest rate did hit then, and reserves were on their way to $1 trillion. So the exit strategy, effectively, I think of as you try to get this blue line back to 0, and then you do it in the same pace as the red line gets back to 2. So by the time you're back to 2, whatever that happens to be, that depends on what's happening in the economy. Whenever you get back to 2, you get back to normal operating procedures where reserve balances are close to where they were beforehand. Okay, so let me just skip to the last point. I can see hope you are at least persuaded a little bit by the idea that the monetary policy framework that we had is fine. A very closely related issue is whether the monetary theory we had is fine, and whether it's missed something, and whether we needed to change a lot to deal with the extraordinary policies. Well, my view, again, here is the crisis per se doesn't mean we need to change this. We always need to change and improve, and we can learn. I've learned a tremendous amount from this crisis. There's an incredible number of what we call natural experiments that have happened, and you can see how the markets work because of this. But I don't see any reason to abandon the core model that I began with, lists of many of them. They didn't fail. Its recommendations for rules-based monetary policies were not the problem. The problem is the policymakers deviated from those policies, seems to me. So in a sense, the model is fine. Now, sometimes people will say, oh, you got these simple little models and the 3 equations. Sometimes the New Keynesian models are ridiculed because they only have a couple or 3 equations. Well, of course, some of them do to illustrate certain points, but lots of them are more complicated. Lots of them have term premia in the interest rate, term structure of interest rates. They have exchange rate channels, and they're open economy models. So this is just a repeat of what I said. Of course, you want to try to improve things. Maybe do better with risk premia, do better with the bank credit analysis. Try to understand the nature of these panics, understand the impact of different regulatory procedures, but I think that's not the macroeconomic problem. Last thing I'd say, to me, the interesting and important and difficult thing is really more of political economy, political macroeconomics. And that really has to do is trying to explain, if you take my whole story as correct, to explain why policymakers didn't follow the framework I began, why they deviated into all these other things. And we don't really know that right now. I have guesses and I'm working on it. It's sort of the heart of policy making is the interaction between the theories that we use and the policies that are implemented. But for some reason they got off. I would say policy got much more interventionist for some reason before the crisis began. I think once you understand that, we'll be able to figure some practical solutions to deal with it in the future. So let me conclude there. I think you've got a sense of what I'm trying to describe and some of the rationale for it. I could go on, but I think it would be a good time to have some questions and answers. Maybe questions and no answers.
Thank you very much, Professor Taylor. As I said at the beginning, my role is secondary here, but still I'm a listener and I'm got excited about this presentation. So what I will do to strike a good balance, what I will do is I will make a short comment and then open the floor to all the questions and comments from the rest of the group, because otherwise I will not have the time to do my comment. I know many people will try to make conventions. So what I'd like to, first, I agree with many things that you have said, but I don't agree with all of them, and in particular I don't agree with the conclusion. And so what I will touch upon is this part, and I think we do not need necessarily the work of political macroeconomics, but we probably have to think more about the framework, so that actually we need more to understand monetary economics. And here what I will, and this is the arguments I will try to say. Okay. This slide is the most important for your reasoning. So what you said, okay, we had a traditional framework that worked for 20 years, okay, and this framework said, okay, we had some rule, and when we followed this rule, everything was very good. But then somewhere around 2000, we actually got off the rule, right? And when we got off the rule, we ended up with a crisis. So the argument is actually we don't need this two paradigm, but we have to get back to the old one, which was the right one. And now, but my argument is the following. The rule of the framework has two components. One is the rule. This is what you explain. But the second is the benchmark according to which you evaluate this rule. And this benchmark was the objective. This was the price stability, right? And now, and this objective is important because when you fulfill the objective, you don't change the rule. And here actually it was very important because we got off the rule, but the price stability was maintained. So we didn't get a signal to change anything, right? So now my argument is that we need some change of traditional paradigm, not in the sense of changing the rule itself, but changing the objective, because perhaps the objective was too narrowly defined and did not send the right signals to us. So this is my comment, and it's up to you. Perhaps you can do it right now, and then we'll open the discussion. How do you prefer? Or you want to collect more questions?
A teeny response. Just a real short. So that's a very good point. And I think the idea is that when the interest rates got too low, you say, well, inflation wasn't going through the ceiling. So what was the big problem? And I think two things. Inflation was starting to rise. It went up in the United States during this period, it started to rise. And so that's a signal that something wasn't going all that right. But I think more importantly, as you can see by the color of my hair, I go back a long time in thinking about monetary policy theory. And the thing that I originally thought was so important about monetary policy is its ability to affect the stability of the economy. In other words, in the 50s and 60s, before the great inflation of the 70s, monetary policy was not always, even though inflation wasn't so bad, it was causing a lot of problems. You had lots of recessions. Milton Friedman used to write about the boom bust. You have increasing money, decreasing money. And so, to me, monetary policy, evaluating it just on the basis of price stability, well, that's the inflation part.